And here we go. Welcome to the WordPress Portsmouth Meetup on 16 February 2022. Today's Meetup is about performance, measuring and improving your core web vitals. We like to thank our sponsors who are Red IT, Scott McEwen, who's one of the co-hosts of the Meetup, is the owner of Red IT, and he'll offer you 25% discount on your web hosting. All you need to do is type in WordUp at the checkout. And we've also been sponsored by 34SP when we physically met, and they provided pizza and refreshments. And my wife, Susan Miller, is the person who provides the Zoom account that I use so that we can have a meetup that lasts longer than 40 minutes or whatever Zoom limit themselves to.
Yeah.
We're recording this meetup and we are going to talk about measuring and improving core web vitals. Now, there are some links on these slides which you can see by going to quicker.com and finding the page or post about the slides, which I'll do later perhaps. Or you can get someone to type these things in. But basically, we're going to be talking about core web vitals, which is a thing that Google have invented to call something to do with measuring performance. And mostly I'm going to be talking about a performance score, which is that figure you can see in green of 100, which means it's good or very good, but probably not perfect. And this is the stuff that's produced by a tool called Lighthouse, which is used by PageSpeed Insights and is used by web page tests as well, and also GTmetrix, different tools that you can use to find out how your website is performing. And this is all about the Lighthouse tool and what I've been doing with it in order to improve the performance of the website. So the website I was working on, quicker.com, 4 days ago, or was it 6 days ago, I managed to get its performance down to 46, which is poor. Up to 49 is poor. Above 49, 50 to 89 is fair, and 90 to 100 is good. And it's poor because of all those metrics that it's reporting in red. First contentful paint, largest contentful paint, cumulative layout shift, and so on. So the question is, why do you want to improve your performance score? So who wants to give us an answer to that?
I guess number one, because it makes a better website for users. And number two, because Google says it affects your ranking on Google.
Yep, I agree with that. Anyone else? Right. Well, I did number 4 for me was I'm doing it for fun. I'm checking the website. Got a question. Oh, look. My wife here is wearing a tartan scarf because she's having a
scarf. It's a sash.
Sorry, a deferred Burns night supper.
It's chirping down the stairs. Can I pull it out?
Yes, why not? Yes.
Was that? It doesn't stop anything here.
No, it's the alarm, is it?
Aye.
Yeah.
It's good every minute.
What an interesting distraction there. Right, so we want to improve our ranking because it's not good enough. I suppose there's another reason you want to do that. And here you can see 46 isn't good enough. We need to do something to improve it. Now we might actually be working with a pretty ugly site to start off with, just because, but never mind. So how are we going to go about doing this? Well, we're going to do it holistically. We're going to work on the whole website, not just a specific page. and we're going to do it bit by bit, and we can make a change, test the results, and if the performance is not yet good, we'll go back and have another go and follow the instructions and see if we can get any better. And once we've got to 90, we'll think, let's see if we can get to 100. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? You'll see a link down the bottom there, quicker.com/process. On there you'll find I've basically written all those words all over again. Right, so I've made up some figures here. I've cribbed something from a real site. Where do you decide what you're going to work on? Well, you can use your Google Analytics or some other mechanism to find out what's most visited on your site. Just as Miss Scott in. And you can produce yourself a nice little pie chart to see that the home page and the red page are the most visited things. And we can see a breakdown of how those are visited and how many visitors there were over the 4 days. And we can also see a breakdown of actually how many requests were made to the site and how many were actual real visitors, not just bots and so on. And we can therefore decide we need to improve this one first, or maybe that one, or work on a couple of them at the same time. Right. And what we need to do basically is to decide, well, measure them. How fast are these sites pages running? So here I've again used some made up figures. In the mobile figure there, we can see that the home page had a performance score of 20 something, and the largest contentful page is 45 seconds, which is an awful long time for a person on a Moto G4 mobile phone to wait for basically what appears in their screen to appear. So that looks like we need to work on that one. On the desktop, we can see the performance figures are better, going up to 70, which is in the fair section. And here I've charted how many seconds you could save, as far as it can tell, for just improving your images, either serving your images in next-gen formats or sizing them or deferring the off-screen images so that they are lazy loaded is the term. Right, so there are 10 top tips to improve WordPress performance. These I got by visiting a number of different websites and picked the 10 most often used ones. And we'll go through each of the different tips briefly. And eventually we will actually get to go and have a look at some of this Lighthouse stuff. So the first tip, the tips are categorized as 1, more computing power, which is your hosting, 2, server do less, and 3, browser do less. So these tips can be shown there. So first one, choose a good WordPress host. Seems a sensible thing to do. Second, use a fast theme, optimize your images, minimize your home page, remove plugins you don't use inline CSS or JavaScript or minified files, use handcrafted excerpts on your home page and archives, use a caching plugin, optimize your WordPress database, and use a content delivery network. Anyone got any other tips they might want to add to that list?
What do you mean by handcrafted excerpts on the homepage?
Well, we'll get to that when we get to item number 7. That's the tip that may not be all that important, not as important as tip number 4 and tip number, well, 3, 4 and 5, which is why they're in that order.
Can I just ask you about inline CSS and JavaScript? Because that seems
Shall we do that when we get to it as well, Terry?
Sure.
I've got one, and that is serve the static stuff with cache the static parts of your page.
Right, that's number 8, use a caching plugin.
No, you don't need to use a caching plugin.
All right, okay. Yes, all right, so that is, we will probably come to that bit. Tell us when we get to it, Steve.
There's also the optimize for mobile.
Yeah, that's in the optimized. That's in there anyway because we'll have a look at the results and we'll see it's saying we'll have a look at the figures for mobile and desktop and some things in between.
Yeah.
So choose a good WordPress host for more computing power. I use SiteGround and it's a reasonable thing. It's shared hosting and I haven't got super duper virtual, whatever they're called, private servers, but SiteGround seems to do the job for me. And it does give responses of less than half a second, and it also includes caching logic, so some responses you get are where the content is being served quickly. What else can I say? There are some hosting companies that aren't particularly good, and they might be slow, and they might also be not very good for WordPress. May they? Nodding, Steve. So let's assume that you've chosen a good WordPress host, or you can't change it right now. What else can you do? Use a fast theme. Well, there are 9,000 themes on WordPress.org, which are free ones. These all have been reviewed, so you expect some of them to be quite good. And there are a whole load of different themes which aren't on WordPress.org, which are premium ones you buy, and they probably become bundled with page builders and a whole load of plugins. And in my experience, those ones aren't fast. So you might have to think about changing your themes to something which can be quicker. What was?
I was doing some testing this morning between a premium Genesis theme and the new 2020 in 5.9.
Yeah.
And 5.9 is significantly faster.
Well, that's good. But I found out that 2020 theme, 2022, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I found that I actually got worse figures with 2022 than I got with some other themes, and I don't really know why. I think it might be to do with the size of the images that it's loading up by default. But yes, I've switched from using Genesis themes to using FSE themes, but for this site, I've actually chosen to use a theme called Generate Press, which was suggested by some people from the WordPress Cambridge Meetup, and I thought I'll give that a go just to see what it's like. And I've been quite happy with it. Right, the third tip is optimize your images. Make your browser do less. So the Lighthouse says your images are too big or they're in the wrong format. So what you can do is you can make them into the format they suggest. Now, it does suggest some newer formats which I've never tried, but the one that it first suggests is you should use Webp files, .webp. Now there's a couple of ways of switching to using Webp files. If your site is small, like the one that I had, you can take each individual file and edit it, save it in Webp format, and resize it to the size that is actually going to be used as a maximum on the website. And whilst you're there, you could think about giving it a sensible name rather than having it called image 3. And you can do a bit of SEO when you re-upload that image. You can then change that image on your website, and you can run the performance test and see if Lighthouse says it's got any better. If you have thousands of images on your website, you may not want to do that, and therefore you can use a plugin such as Webp Express, which will automatically serve .webp files to your users when they request the original JPEG file. You don't have to do anything. And in the blue section, there's some other things you might want to do to improve your themes, your images, such as adding loading equals lazy to your image is that appear after the first one, and width and height attributes. If you're worried that people won't be able to see your WebP images because not all browsers support them, then you might consider implementing some automatic fallback support for them. And you may want to even decide to extend that to any background images. So here we go. Here's an image which is started off as 355,979 bytes. And I saved it in WebP format with a quality of 45%. And it's now 25,528 bytes. So someone who's good at maths can tell me that's smaller. And the quality isn't all that bad. Well, I'm looking at the two images here and I can see some different. What can you see?
The writing on web designers' ideas is massively different.
Is it?
Black spine, white writing.
Yeah. You've got good eyesight, Scott. But
Yeah,
if
the
you
quality's not quite as good, is it?
No,
If you had that
okay.
as a hero logo though, or a hero banner, it wouldn't be too bad, I wouldn't have thought.
And if I put duotone filter over the top of it so it's all grey, you really won't notice. Anyway,
What tool did you use to generate your WebP?
I use GIMP, which is GNU Image Manipulation Program.
You did that in GIMP?
Hmm?
You did that in GIMP?
GIMP, yes, it's called GIMP.
Yeah.
What about the JPEG though? Could that not have been saved at a different quality?
Yes, it could have done, but it still wouldn't have got as small as it. If you go and visit that link, miller.me image reduction size by quality, well, the other way around, you will see that I took a whole load of banner images from WordPress plugins and sized them down and did various different qualities and saw how they affected it, and then looked at some of them and thought, well, that one looks all right to me and that quality. Some of them didn't look all right, some of them did. If there's text, it probably actually gets a bit poor, but if it's just a sort of picture, then it might be all right.
Might depend on your screen as well, to be honest with you. Those they look very very similar on my screen. I've got quite a high quality screen and you virtually can't tell the difference between the two. Even with that web designer's idea, that looks very, very close. Actually.
What about the micro forms and the missing manual CSS?
Which one's that one?
The bright pink one. Almost slap bang in the middle.
Yeah, micro formats, yeah,
and the CSS.
Yeah, slightly grainy, but very, very tiny difference actually.
Really?
On my screen, yeah, very, very tiny difference.
On mine, it's lost a little bit of saturation, but otherwise it looks the same.
Yeah, if I sit not where I normally sit and look at it, then you virtually can't see any difference between the two.
I'm guessing because we're looking for it, we're paying attention, but
yeah,
and because they're on top of each other, you're also looking as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that WordPress for Dummies on mine, I presume the bits at the top are they? I can see like
different books.
It's the different books. It's a all in one, so it's like 5, 6 books in one.
So again, that looks exactly the same quality on both.
Yeah.
I've noticed that I've experimented a bit with this WebP format, and I can see a slight quality issue on your converted ones, but I've noticed that on mobile devices that seems to disappear. Any sort of artifacts that I can see on my desktop screen, they disappear on mobile devices. And do you guys feel that the loss of quality that you can see on the desktop devices is sort of immaterial when you're looking at going after mobile device users, and that on those screens that you don't notice these problems?
I'm guessing as well, because generally the screen for a mobile device is a hell of a lot smaller than desktop.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sat in front of twin 24s.
Yes, I've got, yeah, I'm sure that's why its screen is smaller.
Yeah.
And
And
do
your
you feel that's
resolution's
okay?
different as well.
That can you live with what the desktop screen shows for what you're gaining on speed, and that on desktop devices it looks great?
But even if Herb
I'm
was
sorry, WordPress.
yeah,
Mobile devices, it looks great.
yeah, and even now on the desktop, because we are physically looking for it, I think that's the problem. If you hadn't have seen the two images, or if Herb had done it on one slide and then on another slide, you probably would not have spotted it.
I'm going to get rid of these images so you can't see them
I
anyway.
think you need to think about the user and how they're going to look at the picture.
Yeah,
If it's something like an
because they haven't seen
infographic,
it
they're going to look in detail and need to get it right. If it's just a hero image or background, they're not going to look in detail and go for the speed instead, I suggest.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Depends what you're obviously displaying, doesn't it? If you want to display a very high quality image, then you're going to need to show it in as high a quality as possible without any blemishes at all, basically.
Yeah.
As anything to detract from it. But
if it was an architect's drawing, you wouldn't use it.
yeah, that's what I was thinking exactly. Yeah, Scott. So
what did you use?
For common everyday use, I always say that the quality there is perfectly acceptable. I think a visitor, if they came to the site and they've had to wait a long time for the site to load because it's a nice image, I think no, I just leave the site.
Yeah.
I think you got a good point there about the purpose of the image. I mean, if you display an artwork, photographs, and you were showcasing them and inviting people to perhaps buy your product, then that would be a matter of going for the higher image, I would have thought. I think that I can't see much difference. There is a bit of fuzziness, I must admit, but it's only when you look you can see it.
But then again, if you hadn't have gone so deep into reducing the quality, so say you'd gone to 40%, you might not have had that graining. It would have been a playing exercise to get it right for you.
Yeah.
True.
To answer Terry's question, I used a bit of PHP code to convert images, and I converted them into JPEG and WebP at a variety of different qualities. And this is just an example of one of the images.
And there was some PHP code.
Just a bit of PHP because all the logic is there.
What happens then, Herb? Did you do any that are lower quality than this?
Yeah, I went down to
how
10%.
visually different are they?
I went down to 10% quality, and you can see that by following that link. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Right, so basically, if the image starts off as a JPEG, is now a .webp version, and if you needed some fallback logic, you can then put it into a picture to say here's the WebP version, but if you can't handle that, here's the JPEG. Now, WordPress, when it sees these tags, the image tag will say, aha, I have a variety of different sizes that I can display to you. So you could start off with a large one, which is a WebP file, and it's of good quality. And you could also have it resized to the different scales. So you can have a medium-sized one and a smaller one, so that the device can say, oh, I'm not as big as that. I don't need that image. I'll download the smaller one. So the WordPress resized thumbnails and image variations, whatever they're called, will be picked by it. And the magic of WordPress will deliver the right thing to you. So yes, you might want to start with a high quality big image for those places where they're going to be used, and have WordPress automatically deliver smaller ones. Let's see if Lighthouse says, okay, that's fine. Right. Next thing you want to do is to have a look at your home page, or whichever page you're looking at, and saying, okay, then, so what am I actually displaying here? Can I reduce the complexity of the content so that it gets delivered faster? Can I get rid of a slider I don't want, or can I move that slider somewhere else? Can I get rid of loads and loads of unnecessary background images? Can I tell the browser that these images don't get used straight away? And can I also get rid of some of the CSS and JavaScript that is being loaded up just by removing things? Or do I have to change the theme? Now, this is my big one. And what about the plugins you got on your site? Do you really need all those plugins? Do they really need to do what they think they need to do? Can you get rid of them, or can you dynamically get rid of them, or dynamically load up the plugin that you actually need in order to display something? I've been having a marvelous time playing with two plugins, one called Oik Unloader, first of all, and then another one called Oik Loader, to see what I can do to reduce what's happening on the website. And I could spend an awful long time telling you about the performance of the server, but I'll try not to. Oh, apart from this, of course, here we go. There's the my report of how long a request takes to a particular page if you happen to activate any one of those 12 plugins. Those 12 plugins are the top 12 plugins as downloaded in total from WordPress.org. So yes, Yoast SEO is in there. It's a grey one, and it's slightly slower than if you don't have that plugin installed. And in these tests, I had all-in-one SEO installed, and it was pretty atrocious, really, in terms of performance. There you go. Right, inline CSS. Make the browser do less by delivering less CSS or minify it. Was there a question from Terry? Kelvin?
Yeah, it was from me. I mean, I'd always thought it was a good idea to not have inline CSS, because on every page, the browser is loading that CSS over and over again, whereas if it was in a separate file, the browser would cache that.
There's pros and cons of it. Some people, WordPress developers who are working on the block editor, and some people who are listening, Mark, will tell you that one way of doing the CSS is to say, well, there's only a little bit of it. I'm going to deliver that as inline CSS, and it's only going to be delivered when it's actually needed. So the particular block that you have, like a paragraph, might need some CSS for styling the drop cap, and it will only deliver that to the page when it's actually required. There might be other CSS that you do need to deliver every single time. Therefore, it does make sense to deliver that CSS to the browser as a file, but you can make sure that it's minimized so that it's faster to download, and also see if you can optimize it so that it only contains the CSS that really is needed by the website. If you happen to be a person that likes to use Bootstrap, you'll find you've got a 600K CSS file, of which you probably only use 1% of it on every single page. And that's something that the Lighthouse will have a moan about. Here we can see it's moaned about quite a few different things. And so maybe we can reduce that by removing the routines that are delivering those CSS or JavaScript files. Writing an excerpt, a handcrafted excerpt. So when you're writing a post, or when you're writing a page, or when you're writing other content, you can have these things called excerpts, which you'll see in the editor on the right-hand side. And if you don't write an excerpt and the system has to go and find an excerpt for you, it will use some logic to go and view your content and then strip out stuff to create an excerpt. And all of this takes time. And it used to be that WordPress SEO, and you'll probably find that all-in-one SEO tries to do this in order to produce your meta description if you haven't written that. And it will do this maybe 2 times per post that you're being loaded up, which is time wasting, especially if it has to expand the whole of the post and that post contains a lot of blocks or shortcodes or something which are really irrelevant to the excerpt, but do slow the site down. So why not write your content nicely and write your excerpts nicely, and when you have written them, also think about what you're going to put into the focused key phrase and post meta description if you haven't already done that for your SEO in the first place. Right, using a caching plugin now. Steve, what was your comment? Serving static files?
Yes, there was. I was looking at this the other day, and I haven't got my head around it yet. But you could, without using a caching plugin, apparently there's some setting somewhere that you can use to serve static files. I haven't got my head around it yet.
We might come to that right at the end in some sort of extra things I've got for especially in my local development environment, for serving files so that they don't expire quickly, set expiry stuff. But also last month I went and watched the WordPress Oxford Meetup, which was about using an image CDN, content delivery network, which will do caching of a number of different static files for you, and they will get delivered from your site or from somewhere else which isn't your site, therefore reduces the amount of work that your site has to do.
Yeah.
I looked at this this blog post, the 8 best WordPress caching plugins, when I was looking at someone else's site, and I then tried each of the different caching plugins, apart from WP Rocket because I couldn't be bothered to pay $49, and I found that each of them had their advantages and disadvantages, and really it didn't make all that much difference which one you used, so long as you didn't keep changing all the time. But I still didn't get brilliant results, really. But with SiteGround, the optimizer plugin, I am getting good results because it's caching it nicely and it's serving up the cached version to me whenever I request it and I'm not logged in, and I can see a good response from that. Tip number 9, optimize your WordPress database. People say, well, why don't you remove your revisions? If you reduce the number of revisions, then the WordPress database will be faster. Well, my experience is that I've never done this, and I've never had any performance problem with the database access. And here you can see, visiting these 5 different pages, that the amount of time that was spent accessing the database is a fraction of the amount of time spent overall delivering the page. So
how big the database is. I found on one site that's an e-commerce site, the database is about 150 megabytes.
Yeah.
And we were getting poor performance issues, and I found that actually optimizing that database made a big difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. And when it's a very large database, and when the queries are probably not that effective, but for a simple one, I don't think it's necessary to actually try to do things like removing revisions. But it's something you can measure. How long is it taking to perform your queries, and what can you do to improve them? So one way of measuring your queries is to use a plugin called Query Monitor. The figures that I produced here show that the query, say for Elementor, where it took 6.04 of a second to run the queries, but 6.8 seconds to deliver the page, it's because it ran 85,000 different WordPress hooks, well, not necessarily different, and action hooks and filters, which was nearly 4 times the size of the home page, and also loaded out 3,404 PHP files just to deliver the page.
Are all those stats from that same plugin, Herb?
No, the stats on these stats actually come from my trace plugin, which we can see later.
Because it's useful.
And finally, tip number 10 is to use a content delivery network, which I've never used, and therefore I can't tell anything about it. So there's the 10 different tips. What's the time now? 7:45. And we can have a look at those for real. Right, performance measurements. So we use Lighthouse, and we're trying to get figures going to 90 to 100. Lighthouse is an open source tool, which you can download if you want to run a local copy, or you have it inside your Chrome browser. If you want to find out the performance of your site, then you can use Inspector. Just open up Chrome, go to the Inspector, choose Lighthouse, and visit the URL you want to test the performance of. Choose the Lighthouse tab, fill in the checkboxes you want to have measured, and click on Generate Report, and off it goes and generates a report for you. And the report might look something like this, which is what I ran back in October. So as far as it's concerned, the performance was 60, but accessibility best practices and SEO were good. Now, you don't have to run accessibility best practice SEO and another thing which is called PWA, Progressive Web App. Every time you can just limit yourself to performance, which is what I do now. You'll find that when you're running it in Chrome, that sometimes it says, "Ooh, something went a bit wrong," and that might be because you happen to hide the browser page when you were doing something else whilst it was running, and it went a bit funny. So I now run it from the command line. But that's one way of doing it. Or the other way of doing it, of course, is just go and use PageSpeed Insights. But this way, using the Chrome Explorer, you can do it on your local development environment. So you can just run it against any site which may not be accessible to other people. When you run Lighthouse and you get a figure of, say, 60 or 61, you can have a little look at how it's broken down, and different versions of Lighthouse have different weightings for the different metrics to tell you to produce a different result. So this one was produced with Lighthouse version 8, and Lighthouse version is now 9.3 point something. And if you want to, you can fiddle with these sliders and you can produce a better result. And you can see that if you reduced your largest contentful page from 4,530 milliseconds to a certain figure, then you will get a better result. So maybe you can think about using this to find out, what do I need to do in order to get a better result? Or you can just have a bit of fun with it. So here we go. Having done some changes, I have now got myself a pretty good score in the 90s for certain things, and I was pleased with that, wasn't I? But Lighthouse is still producing reports saying there's still some activity to do to improve. And it keeps on saying these things: serve images in next-gen formats, reduce unused CSS, and you can go on and on and on, but eventually you decide you have to stop. Or there's no benefit in trying to do this, or I'm going to wait a while until WordPress has done something for me. Right, there is a WordPress performance team that was only actually started in October, and they are looking at things to do with improving images. For example, better support for Webp files, so that when you upload a .jpeg or a .png file, it might say, here you go, I'll generate the .webp version for you, and when appropriate, we can serve that one up. They're also working on performance of object cache, which is sort of database related stuff, and some other different things to do with measurements and reporting of things, and JavaScript. If you want to get involved with performance, then you can join them on the WordPress performance channel on Making WordPress Slack, and they had a chat yesterday. So there's a couple of different links you can look at. Right, let's have a look at quicker.com. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go and visit this website called Quicker, and we will look at the different reports. So I'm going to stop sharing this.